Okay, so how many times have I given you this look of social structure, right? Over and over. At this point in the semester, I've said it a lot of times. We talked about statuses, roles, groups, organizations and networks, and then social institutions. From this point forward, most of everything that we'll talk about are those social institutions. It's something that is so critical that I want to make sure that you understand what a social institution is. Our book, as most introduction to sociology books are, they simply will talk about those institutions like family, education, religion, the economy, the government, or politics, for instance. I want you to know what those institutions are doing for society before we just jump right into them and talk about it. So, a social institution is a pattern of beliefs and behaviors focused on meeting social needs. You remember way back when we talked about the social construction of reality, that it's really just us interacting and developing and changing society every day by habituating our behaviors. We're just doing things over and over and over and creating these patterns, right? We are just constructing reality in these interactions that we have with one another. We're not every day randomly coming up with a new way of doing things. We are building our society through those interactions every single day. And every time we get a new society member, they just add right on to it and they jump in where they fit in and we just keep going, right? A social institution is how we understand the boundaries of those kind of patterned behaviors. It's an organized and established way of those relationships and those networks bound together so that we can meet our specific needs. Think about those. Remember, we were talking about the status sets. You are a father, you are, a mother, or you are a sister or a brother, you're a child, you're a grandparent, right? These are multiple people, multiple statuses, and they live in a house, right? And what's important about that house is that down the street, there's going to be a school, right? And in that school, you'll have other people with statuses, a teacher, a student, you'll have a counselor, right? You'll have a recess aide, all kinds of people that work in this school. More statuses with people with more roles that are just interacting in their behaviors together. Somewhere else in this neighborhood, you've got a hospital, and that hospital has doctors and nurses and patients and social workers, all kinds of people, the custodial staff, the CNAs, everybody's at the hospital. Again, a whole lot of people with status, whatever that status is, whatever those roles are. This doctor had a teacher, or this doctor has kids or students at this school. This nurse really is also this, father here in this house. But we like to think when we think of social institutions that we're talking about these buildings, the hospital, the school, or the household, for instance. But really, what we're talking about is the established pattern or the boundaries that we create around these statuses and the patterns of behavior that go along with it. I don't need an educational building. I don't even need Rock Valley College for me to understand that education includes the status of someone operating as a teacher and the status of someone operating as a student for the purposes of that student to be taught some things by that teacher. There's going to be someone who operates as the principal who maybe organizes all of those teacher and student relationships. There's going to be a counselor, someone who might organize or pay attention to the other needs that the student has or helps them register for their classes. And there might be somebody, especially with small kids, who's responsible for keeping an eye on the safety when we give those kids a break to play, right? I don't care what school this is for me to see the patterns of those behaviors. I don't even have to have a physical school. These people can do all this stuff outside right next to the Rock River. And they don't even need a name. It's just that if I'm walking down the street and I see a society or I see a group and I want to understand them, if I watch long enough, I might say, you know what that looks like? That looks like a father and a mother. And I'm going to guess that those are those two children. Those children belong to them. And that older person that I see, I'm going to guess that those are the grandparents, maybe the mother's mother, or maybe even the father's mother. I didn't need the house. I didn't need anybody to tell me that they were a family. I recognized those behaviors. And so the boundary of it is not the building itself. The boundary is that culturally, I understand those patterns of behaviors. I know those patterns of behaviors because I understand those statuses and I understand what it is I expect them to be doing. Something that is worth you knowing is that social institutions are universal. You find them in all societies. All societies have similar challenges. If we are society, a human society, we need more people. Well, guess we got to figure out how to make some families around here because we need some adults to make more babies, especially when we need to replace the people who we've lost. All societies have the same needs. And in order to meet those needs, they've got to come up with solutions so that they can maintain the stability as a society. How those needs are addressed is not the universal part. The universal part is that the needs are the same and the societies are going to try to solve them. That's what social institutions are. So we will talk about families. Family is the social institution that's just a socially recognized group of individuals who often are joined by blood, marriage, or adoption, who form emotional connections and an economic unit of society. Their purpose is to replace society's members through procreation. They have the babies and then they socialize the babies. They sanction appropriate sexual behavior. They teach kids how to act normatively, and they provide economic and emotional support. The economy of a society is the social institution that society manages its goods and its services. There are things that we need to make. There are things that we need to have. The production of things, the distribution of the things that we have, the use of our natural resources, the manufacturing of our goods that we make from our natural resources, and those professional services. We need teachers, we need lawyers, we need accountants. So when we think about things like whose job is it to do what, we're talking about the economy. Sometimes people provide these things for themselves, which is why we might say that some farms or households are self-sustained economies. But usually people trade their labor to make money so that they can buy what they need. That's why issues of jobs and work and labor is what we're talking about when we're talking about the economy. But we're also talking about issues of property and business ownership. Again, how do we get what we need? That's what the economy is about. We'll also talk about education. Just like we gave in the example, education is the social institution where we figure out how to make sure that our children and our social community members, for instance, are taught basic things. What is it that you need to know to be successful or survive in this society? We teach you how to listen. We teach you all the cultural norms. Sometimes this education we get from our family, but educational institutions are just our formalized way to try to figure out what is it that we need to know, because all societies have to figure this out. Again, I keep saying, I don't have to talk about Rock Valley College as an institution. The educational solution, the institution of education in our society sometimes is formalized through particular school and school buildings, but it doesn't have to be. We're talking about socializing children. We're teaching people the skills that they need for work. We are making sure that people have a place to be while their parents go to work every day, for instance. Again, we've talked before that there's some manifest functions of school and there's some latent functions of school. How do you meet your friends? How do you learn things about the social world that you're not going to learn from your family or from your church, for instance? Oftentimes we talk about government, but really politics is the social institution itself. That's not so clearly defined in a lot of places, but it's the thing that shapes the governance and decision-making processes of a society. So issues like power and authority, and collective action, things that we'll talk about. When we talk about the resources that we have, the rights that people have, the responsibilities that people have, how those things are distributed, that's what our political systems are doing. The fact that we have a democratic republic society with a democratic republic government is only because that's how we designed our government. We can be governed in a different way if that's what we decided. Other societies are not governed in the same way. And again, you could decide in your particular society or group to be governed however you want. We don't have to be talking national boundaries to talk about societies or groups that will follow the same structure. So that politics social institution includes things like the government, sure, but it also includes the police, it also includes the military, it also includes the court system, because all of those things are involved with issues of power and authority and maintaining order and maintaining control so that we can keep ourselves as a society safe and stable, and continue to move forward. Another one of those social institutions is the institution of religion. And this is critical to remember that sociologists aren't so much concerned with the actual values or beliefs that we might find in one particular religion or the other. We're talking about the fact that there are beliefs and values and practices that have to do with the sacred or spiritually significant things. Every society has some version of religion, some version of this is what we generally think about the spiritual world. This is what we generally hold as sacred. So I can be a fraternity or a sorority, and I might not be talking about God, for instance, but there are some things that we might consider to be sacred, some things that we consider not to be profane, some things that we hold as deep truths, right? So we'll talk about religion as a social institution. It's not about the beliefs themselves, it's about the role that religion plays in society and what need is it solving that society needs to solve. Like what challenges does it have? And then also medicine. And there is some distinction between medicine and health, that we'll get to when we get to this part. But it's a social institution that's aimed at preventing or diagnosing or treating illness, which is separate than promoting health, right? That's why I'm not calling it health. Medicine is both interested in diagnosing and treating illness. Again, we don't want everybody to die out. We want to promote health because that's what we need for our society to remain stable so that we don't disappear off the planet. So sociologically, we're interested in medicine because the things that we define as illnesses, the treatments that we determine as useful or not, those are culturally determined. We don't always believe that certain things are illnesses. For instance, some things we might have thought were psychotic. Some things we thought were just a function of somebody's choices before we get to the idea that something is an illness. Some things we might even assign a supernatural idea or divine idea. You've got a possession before we start to think of it as an illness, right? So the question of what do we define as ill, as something that we can diagnose and treat? What ways do we promote health and wellness? And what does that mean? What things in our culture or in our society do we think about as allowable or not? So these 6 social institutions we will talk about from now until the end of our course, but I don't want you to just jump into a conversation about family or a conversation about education and not know why we're talking about that. Remember, social structure. We've talked about those statuses and those roles, the groups that we form, the networks and the organizations that we form are all part of us creating these patterns of recognizable behavior that are bound together. We understand those patterns in a very chunked way. Those chunks, if you will, are our social institutions. It is universal that societies will try to determine how to satisfy these needs. What we consider to be family in one society is not going to be the same in another society. It won't even be the same word because we have different languages. But I bet you that society has a solution. How do we get children? How do we take care of the children? How do we replace the people who have gone? How do we take care of them and move them on? How do we answer questions of power and authority and responsibility? If you are a stable society, you will have a solution to those things. So they organize our lives. It's the context for our individual action. The reason I know what the roles are for the status of teacher is because we've organized those patterns before I showed up as a teacher, for instance. And we'll continue to construct that reality and participate in those interactions until we come up with a whole new set. So there's not such a clear cut between which institution handles which challenge, right? Because what I might understand in the educational institution, for instance, is who's taking care of the kids. We saw when we were talking about COVID, or when we went through COVID, for instance, who should feed the kids during the day? Should the family be doing it, or is the educational institution and doing it, right? But we are all part of these institutions. We are all part of these institutions. We are interacting as members of all of these institutions every day. And again, you don't have to walk into the building to be a part of that. So we will say more about each one of these institutions individually. We'll see the ways that those things overlap over time. But that's it. We're talking about our social structure and we've gotten to the last part of it. And that's how we'll finish out the class. Thank you so much.